Greetings and welcome to another C# coding session. We are still working on our Minecraft server launcher, and at the moment it looks a little bit like this. See, one of the things that I would like to address today is our kind of finicky buttons. It's at the moment not particularly easy to see which buttons are enabled and which ones are disabled. We could fix that easily by using visibility instead. But I'm kind of thinking it would be more interesting to do some custom buttons and probably also see about attaching them to the border so they kind of try and keep up with what kind of window resizing we are doing. So today we are going to make a custom user control that will replace our existing buttons and have them render some custom layouts instead. I've got a few other things planned, and we'll see where we end up at the end of the list. Let's see. Better custom buttons. Remove. Yes, definitely the remove button. At the moment it doesn't do anything. So we should probably see about adding an actual remove option to our little profile editor. I would also like to see if we can get some scheduling done. See, the whole purpose of this particular launcher is, well, part of it is, of course, starting up and shutting down the server instances. Another part of it would be to have maintenance restarts and be able to schedule when those restarts should occur. And somehow implement a backup feature. So if I, for whatever reason, want to schedule a daily backup, for example, or maybe a weekly backup, that option is available too. So those are some of the things that we are going to look at today. For the moment, though, I think we will start by seeing what we can do about these buttons. So without further ado, let's have a look at that. Well, as we just saw, these parts we already have in there. So that basically means we don't need these anymore. So let's get rid of them. Okay, so in order to make a button that will suit our purpose, we could go about it a number of different ways, just for the sake of showing how to do a custom user control in the simplicity of a button. I'll create one from scratch. Another way would be to extend the existing button control and then basically override the rendering of it and implement custom drawing there, which is possible. But let's do a completely custom user control for this, just because we can. So let's get rid of some of this stuff because we don't need it at the moment. We'll do a user control, and we'll do the button thingy. We'll call this flat button. There we go. And then we will add in a user control. User controls are basically an empty template for creating a control that does something. What that particular control does is, of course, up to us. So here we'll add in flat button. And that's it. Basically, it starts up pretty much like any other form would do. And from here we can, of course, manipulate the size of it, what we want it to do, how we want to put stuff on it, and so on and so forth. So just for the sake of argument, let's grab the main form again and see how big these buttons actually are. They have a width of 75 pixels and a height of 23. So let's copy that and then go to our custom button and set the size to the same. There we go. Now it has the exact same size as a standard button. And just like any other stuff, there are standard events attached to it that we can hook and do something with. For the moment, it won't have much in it, but we will definitely extend that. So let's grab this, stuff that down there, and then we'll see what kind of properties we want to put in here. Now we already have a back color property that comes standard with the user control. We have the standard font that follows whatever font settings are currently default in Windows. The forecolor, which in this case would be the text color. And these settings are settings that follow the standard Windows theme. We can of course change these, which we're going to do. But just like we did on the main form, we wanted to add in some custom stuff to kind of customize how this thing looks. Now, we do have, let's see the properties again. We do have enabled built in here already. There should be an event that we can hook, which will allow us to detect whenever it is enabled or disabled, and that is definitely something that we need to address, because we need to be able to detect whenever the code in the main form disables the button, so we can change how it looks. And what I would like to do is kind of borrow from, let's grab this again, kind of borrow from how we designed the UI colors here. In this situation, it kind of brightens up the surface a little bit to show that we're hovering over this particular profile. And when we select it, it picks the standard highlight colors from the Windows theme settings. So we're going to adopt something similar for this one. Okay, so just like we did on the main form, we kind of need to tell Windows that we want to draw stuff ourselves. So we'll set the style for it. And for that we are going to need some painting stuff. We'd like to optimize double buffering to reduce flickering and blinking. We'll add in resize redraw in case the button size is changed. That will force a redraw of whatever's being drawn at the moment. And finally, we need to specify that we are going to do the painting ourselves and enable all of these flags. So we'll put this down here so it's more visible. There we go. Nope. And there we go. All right. Now, in order to actually start painting stuff on the form, we of course also need to see about grabbing the Sorry, this is not form events, this is user control events. There we go. We need to grab the paint event, so let's grab that. Protected override void on paint. There we go. And here is where we can do our custom drawing stuff. All right. So we know that a button contains a surface of some kind. We also know that it typically has some kind of label attached to it. And of course there is the click event. So how do we go about doing this? If we build this quick, whenever you mess with user controls, whenever you make changes to your user control, you need to rebuild your project so that the latest version of the user control code is synchronized with the rest of your project. If I were to add this flat button onto the main form at the moment, it would be correctly synchronized. But if I make any kind of changes, I might end up with desynchronized code, which could easily block the form from showing correctly because of some code error. So always remember to build whenever you do some kind of change, or you might end up with some stack crash problem in Visual Studio, which basically just blocks you from seeing the visible version of the form itself. And it can be a little hinky getting things fixed after that. In any case, if I drop a button onto the form, you'll see that it immediately adopts the current back color, which is fine. However, we kind of need to make it look like something. At the moment, it's just a gray box. And if I deselect it, we can't actually see it. So we definitely need to put some kind of text on it to match the regular buttons, and we also need to add in a click event. So let's get something done here. First of all, let's see if we can do some kind of outline depending on how depending on the actual state of the button. In this case, is it enabled? Is it disabled? Are we hovering over it with the mouse? Did the mouse leave the button? These are all things that we kind of need to take a look at and answer those questions to see if the looks of the button needs to be changed. So to begin with, let's see if we can do a little bit of, how should I put this, default magic with it. We know that it adopts the color scheme from the form it's dropped on. We just saw that. So for the most part, we can assume that the fore color and the back color will be the correct colors. And for the actual hover effect, we'll use about the same setup as we did on the server profile listing. So we'll simply just ask for the highlight color of the current Windows theme and then use that for actually highlighting it. Okay, so let's see. First of all, we need to figure out whether the button is enabled or not. And the reason for doing this is because we need we kind of need two different kind of themes to properly show the button in its enabled and disabled state. For the sake of allowing us proper customization, we may want to add in some extra color properties that determine exactly what the button should look like in its enabled state, in its disabled state, and so on. So we'll get to that. If it's enabled, if it's disabled. There we go. Now we've added these in. Render the button in enabled state, which would be some kind of bright setup maybe. And render the button in disabled state. Dark setup maybe. So for the disabled state, we can easily adopt the standard forecolor and back color, since these would pretty much follow the background of the parent form. And for the sake of adopting the colors correctly, we might as well set the forecolor here so that it adopts a proper color that we can use for the button itself. However, as you can see, this now rendered these buttons pretty much useless, so I think we'll just put this back and then do the custom setups for our button instead. Alright. Okay, so for that we are going to need some properties. And adding properties to a user control is pretty much the same thing as adding properties to any other class. No difference there. The only difference here is that we actually have a working surface that we can do something with. Whereas a standard class doesn't exactly always have a surface that we can do something with. So let's see. We need a text color, and we also need a kind of rendering surface color, I guess, for disabled and enabled state, and for the hovering we'll just use the system hover colors, so sorry, system highlight colors. Okay, so let's get a property in here. We shall call this enabled forecolor, and for this we are going to need a color. Do a quick property here, like so, and this one we will set to, I don't know, enabled forecolor. Yeah, we'll just do the colors that we used before. We also need a back color, so we'll add this in here, enabled back color. And for some reason my system is really sluggish today. Anyway, enable back color, which would be the 64, 64, 64 as we were using before. Actually, these should probably be disabled. Yeah, let's do disabled here. Use those. Disabled. Disabled. There we go. And then perhaps make this a darker shade. Let's see what kind of shade we can get there. Forecolor. Maybe use this one, silver, or perhaps just gray. yeah, it doesn't matter if they are all that visible when they're disabled. Yeah, we'll just use the yeah, we'll go with the gray and see what happens. And then of course the same thing for enabled, but since we need stuff enabled, we need to increase the brightness a little bit on these. So we'll do enabled here, and then let's see, what if we increase this by say 16? That would be 80. There we go. And then enabled. Now we probably need to make these a little brighter. Let's see, we'll use the silver here, and then do say a black here, and see how it ends up rendering. Since we now have some colors, we can actually do a little bit of rendering. So let's give that a shot. Now, just as we did on the main form in its paint event, let's see if we can find it quick. Rendering stuff on form, which would be right here. We're using the same event, so that effectively means that the graphics object is also available to us. So we'll use that. And we kind of want to make a slight box effect, just like we have on the selection box up here. So let's see how we actually ended up doing that. We did that by changing the alpha channel, which is transparency. So we'll do about the same thing here. And since we kind of need to replicate this code more or less over and over again, we might as well see if we can do a little method that handles drawing that particular box. So for this we had the draw selection box. Since that's going to be more or less the template for the entire looks of this particular button, selection box might not be the greatest name to pick for it, but we'll do something very similar. Okay, so we'll call this draw button box. There we go. We need the graphics object for it. We also need to know what kind of back color we want to use, and we also need to know what kind of forecolor we need to use. Now, for the moment, the forecolor doesn't actually do anything because we don't exactly have any kind of text that we can draw, but we'll get to that. Okay, so we know that we want to draw a box that is about the size of this user control, which should be fairly straightforward. We need to, do a fill rectangle. The reason we need to do this is because we want to draw the entire surface, but we want to do the kind of semi-transparency shading effect, just like we've done on the profile boxes. So for this we are going to need a brush. So we'll do a solid brush and base it on the back color. From ARBG, we need to use an alpha of 64, just like we did on the main form, and then of course the actual colors, red, green, and blue from the back color, like so. There we go. We now have a solid brush that we can paint with, and then we need to specify. Let's see, we are missing a. There we go. Then we need to specify where we want to draw and how big of an area we want to draw. So to do that, we'll grab a rectangle. No, we don't need a floating one. We know that we need to cover the entire user control. So we'll start at the upper left-hand corner and then specify the width of the user control, and this would be that one. And again the height. There we go. And on top of that, we then need to draw the solid border. So we'll do that, which would be just a draw rectangle. And again, we'll use exactly the same setup, except in this case, we don't actually have to split all of these. We can simply just specify the back color. So we'll do a new solid brush and then specify the back color because we know that it's solid. So grab a copy of this since it's exactly the same thing. However, there is one exception. Oh, sorry, this needs to be a pen. There we go. We need to ensure that it actually draws the bottom and right hand part of the border within the user control itself. For some reason, it seems that these particular dimensions on a drawn rectangle that is not filled is always off by 1. Beats me why, but that's just how it is. So we'll simply just subtract that 1 pixel, and that should then fit the outline of the button within the user control itself. Alright. For future reference, this is where we need to draw the button's text. There we go. Alright, so if this thing is enabled, then we will draw a button box, grab the graphics from the paint event, which is associated with the user controls surface, and for enabled state, this would then be enabled back color, and this would be enabled forecolor. There we go. And basically do the same thing for a disabled state. So grab the disabled back color and the disabled forecolor. There we go. Alright, one thing that we still need to manage here is to have it react to changes to the enabled property. So how do we go about that? Let's see. We can grab override void on, and here's a whole bunch of different things that we can hook into. It's basically the same thing as listing all the events. This is just a different way of going about it, which in effect allows us a bit more control over what happens with the event by the sheer fact that we can effectively stop this event from traveling any further throughout the form itself, or the control itself in this case. The way to go about that is by not executing the base code for this particular event. that effectively stops that event from traveling through all the controls within the body of the form itself. In this case, we don't really need it. We just need to detect that the enabled property has changed and then force a redraw of the control itself. So the way to do that is simply by invalidating the current contents. So we'll call invalidate. That then forces a redraw, and that should then ensure that our user control now correctly changes its surface color according to whether it's enabled or disabled. And since I kind of want to test this now, I need to rebuild the solution to sync up the user control code with the rest of the project. Basically, you can consider a user control as a child project that runs within the parent project, which is your main project. If you change something to the child project, you need to rebuild it, otherwise the parent project won't know about any of these changes. So, successful build. Let's get the form up, and we can now grab it from here. And there we go. We now have a nice shaded button. And we'll see what happens if we go into the properties and disable it. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Interesting. Well, not entirely sure why though. Enabled. Well, we'll see if we can figure out why. Let's see if this actually triggers or not. Ah, right. Yeah, we might be able to do this. Flat button on enabled changed. Let's see if that actually outputs to some kind of... right. Sometimes it doesn't react within the ID itself. Let's see, we'll put a quick checkbox here just to test this and see what happens. So if this one changes, then we'll do the flat button 1.enabled equals checkbox 1.checked. And then do a run and see what happens. There we go. It got a little dark though. Let's see if we can fix that. Let's see. That would be this setup. Might be because, right, yes. That would be because we are drawing the same color with a different transparency on the current background color, which is a little, Okay. For this, we will see about changing this up a bit. So let's go 80 instead and see if that makes it a little more visible. Not much. How about 96? Right. That would be because at the moment this one has a property storage that says still 64, so I'll just change it here. And no, actually, do the 80. Let's see what that looks like. Let's see, did I change the right one? No, I didn't. That would be this one I need to change. So that one needs to be like so. And this one needs to be like so. There we go. That's very gray. Let's see. There we go. Much, much better. Now at least we can see it when it's disabled. Alright, cool. Um, so, next up, would be nice to see if we can actually put some text on there. So let's add a text property to it, which is also fairly quick and easy to do. Um, all it needs is a public string called text, grab a getter and a setter for it, and set it to flat button, whatever. We can always change that. Interesting. Now it complains that flatButton.text hides inherited member user-control.text. To make the current member override that implementation, add the override keyword, otherwise add the new keyword. Okay, in this case we kind of want to replace the template text property, so we will simply add new to it, and that effectively disregards all of the previous inherited code and replaces it with our setup instead. So now that we have a property that we can manipulate in terms of what goes on the button, we also have the ability to actually render the text. So to do this, we will make use of similar functions as we used in the main form, sorry. And to do so, we kind of had some interesting things that we did with it. We used the drawString to render the text, and in this case we kind of want to center the text within our custom button. So to do that, we are going to need an instance of string format. String format allows us to specify an area where we want to draw a text, and then use whatever alignment we have specified in a string format setup. So that basically allows us to left align, center align, right align, top, middle, bottom, and so on and so forth within the space of a rectangle. And that is basically it. So for this, we want to use the drawString, and we want to specify the text property that we put in there. We want to use the font that we've assigned to this particular user control. We need to specify a brush to draw with. In this case, we have the 4 color, so we'll just do a new solid brush and specify the 4 color. There we go. And then we need to specify where we want to draw this text. In this case, we kind of want to change things up a little bit, so this would be the right one. We need to specify a rectangle of where we want to draw it, and then we can add in the alignment of the text itself within that rectangle. Now, just like before, we kind of want to specify the size of the user control, so we'll just use this, and then we'll specify the string format. Now at the moment it will just draw the text in the upper left hand corner, because those are the default settings for string format. However, we can change these by using these two properties. Alignment will be the horizontal alignment of the text within that rectangle, and line alignment will be the vertical alignment. So here we want to put centered, and for the line alignment we want to put center. That should now effectively render the text smack in the middle of the button itself. Okay. Centers the text horizontally, and middle aligns the text vertically on the line. There we go. And rebuild it like so. And then we should have a text property in here somewhere. Perhaps, maybe. No. Grab this again. There we go. Now we have it. Okay, so now we should be able to change that at some point. Roger that. Let's see. We did a complete replacement of the text property. Let's see what happens if we don't do that and simply use the built-in one. That should allow us to still access it. We may want to add in some default setup for it, perhaps. Not necessarily something that's vitally important. No, we still don't have it here. May have to do some extra. Let's see. I did rebuild it. See if we can get something down here, maybe. Nope. There are ways to force that text property into the properties box. For now, we don't really need to be all that specific with it, as long as it still renders some kind of text on there. Let's see. One thing that we definitely need to add to the custom button here is a detection that tells us if the text of it changes and then force a redraw. So let's see if we can find one that does that. And there is a on text changed. Just like before, we will force a redraw like so, and that should take care of that particular issue. Now let's see if we can put some text in there. We'll do it here. Flat button 1, text equal blah 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 blah. There we go. Okay, let's see what happens. We now have a text being rendered on the button called blah, and it gets pretty faded when it's disabled. It's fairly solid when it's enabled. However, the text color we might want to change. So let's see if we can do something about that. Okay. So let's see, disabled, and disabled looks pretty decent. We may want to grab a slightly brighter color for this, just to make the button more visible. So why don't we grab the 224 that we used before. That would also make the black text stand out a little more. So let's see about that. Rebuild again to sync up correctly and stuff this in here. And actually, before we add that in again, I think we will go into the constructor down here and set the text default to flat button. There we go. And yes, I know it doesn't exist, which of course right now is a problem because we can't rebuild the solution because the button isn't there. So we'll just comment these out quick and then do a rebuild, and then we can drop the button on there. There we go. Now this one again has the same problem that it is currently effectively grabbing the wrong color settings. Is it really that? Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, let's see. Remove these. Give it a go. Yeah, it is pretty dark. But that's definitely something that we can change. So, let's see if we can change the look of it a little bit. Why don't we add in a option that lets us control the alpha channel for it, so that we can have different transparency levels depending on the enable-disable state of the button. So let's just add in alpha and then do alpha here, which means we need to change this one for true. Let's go with I don't know. Let's do 128 and see how it looks. And then for disabled, we used 64. There we go. Let's see. See, now it looks a little better. So we might want to adopt this for hover as well, but we'll see how it looks. Looks pretty decent when it's disabled. All right. So, adding a hover effect. That again kind of needs some trickery. So we definitely want to see if we can grab some extra events for that. Now, there are a number of different events that we could hook into to try and figure out whether the mouse is actually in here or not. One of them would be the enter. Let's see if we can grab the events here so we can get some descriptions and see what these actually do. Now, we have the enter event. Occurs when the control is entered. Entering a control is done by a lot of different things. One of them would be the mouse actually hitting the control itself. Another one would be, say, hitting tab, which then focuses the control. Touch devices, if touched within the controls area, the enter effect, event could also trigger. So there are a couple of different ways that you can detect whenever the control is actually being entered. In a similar fashion, we also have the mouse enter, which would be here. Occurs when the mouse pointer enters the control. Since we want to do a mouse hover effect, we may want to go about this one. And in a similar fashion, we have leave, which also lets us know whenever the mouse exits the user control itself. So we can use these to detect when the mouse is over the button and when the mouse leaves the button, and thereby create the hover and unhover effects. So we'll go with these and see how it ends up working. On mouse enter, and we also need the mouse leave. There we go. All right, so for the enter effect, we kind of need to work out whether the button is enabled, because we don't want the hover effect to work if the button is disabled. So we definitely want to ask about that. But before we do that, we kind of need a quick flag to figure out whether the mouse is actually over the controller or not. The mouse enter and leave events will control those flags for us. And we can also use the lost focus event to reset that particular flag for us. So let's go up here and do a mouse over button, and we'll default this to false because we always assume that the mouse is not over the button. So we'll go down here, mouse enter. We know that whenever mouse enter occurs, that only occurs when the mouse is actually over the user control. So let's just set this to true right away. And then if the button is enabled, then we'll force a redraw. Now, this is the quick and easy way of doing it. There's absolutely no intelligence behind doing any of this, and that's probably something that we should think about, because this will then force a redraw regardless of the state the button is in every single time the mouse enters the user control. It would be more beneficial performance-wise if we do a different kind of check to figure out whether we actually have to redraw the button or not. So by making a small change, we can figure that out. If we end up having something within the button itself, whenever the mouse moves from the button to whatever's on the button, it effectively produces sort of these child-parent enter-leave settings or triggerings, which can lead to some flickering. Well, actually, come to think of it, this should actually be enough. So let's just leave it at that. We also know that whenever the mouse leaves, we have to reset our flag because we are no longer in control of it. But before we do this, we need to figure out whether we have to force a redraw. So if the button is enabled and mouse over button, then we need to force a redraw, and we actually need to probably set this twice. Now we'll do an else here and then move this up here, because if the mouse is leaving the button and it's enabled, then we need to unhover it. Okay. If this would be the paint, so here we need to figure out whether the button needs to be drawn in hover mode or if it needs to be drawn in its standard mode. So let's see if the mouse is over the button. If it is, and if it isn't, then we need to draw it in the standard setup. So to get this, we kind of need to use the let's see, what did we use up here? I believe we used the system colors for it. Let's see. Miscellaneous draw selection box. No, we used cornflower blue. So let's go with that. Alright. Mouse over button. Color dot cornflower blue. And yeah, we'll just use the enabled for color. That should be fine. There we go. So Let's see if this thing actually works. What do you know? It now has a hover effect. It's not particularly bright, but it actually does have a hover effect, and it doesn't particularly blink or anything. Let's see what happens if it's disabled. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Okay, cool. We may want to fix up the hover effect a little bit so it's a little brighter. So we'll change the alpha set channel for it and see what it looks like now. There we go. Much better. Okay. Cool. Final thing that we need to do is we need to see about clicking this particular button and then see what happens if it is enabled. Now, a user control by standard has the click event, it has the mouse click event, so we can actually just forget about handling those. Since we are manipulating the built-in enabled property. If a user control is disabled, then any of the click events simply won't trigger, even if the control is clicked. So that pretty much takes care of handling the actual clicking on the button. So let's call this done and see if we can do some changes here. Now, this one we can get rid of. We don't need it anymore, so bye. We'll get rid of this quick, and then we will see if we can replace those buttons with the new ones. Okay, let's see. These would be the add, the edit, remove, start, stop. So we definitely need the code from these click events because we kind of need to replace them. So for now, I think we will just grab a copy of these and store them quick because we might end up accidentally deleting some of this stuff. So I'll just add in a extra class here and use that for storage. There we go. So grab these control events and stuff them in here. Now we have a quick backup of the code, so we can start replacing those buttons. Alright. Let's see, we need an add, we need an edit, a remove, and a start and a stop. Let's get rid of these quick, and then do these. This would then be the add. Let's see what happens if we double click it. It says load. Okay, we don't particularly need the load event, unless we of course use this to set the caption for it. We can do that. Yeah, why not? Add. Then we need to set the click to yeah, we'll just use the click, and we don't want to use that. We'll just use the one we already have. There we go. And then we'll rinse and repeat with the others. That's one of them. And another one, which would be the edit. We'll do the edit.click and use the one we already have. Edit click right there. And we'll grab the remove. go. Remove like so, and do the click, which is right there. And we also had a start and a stop. Whoops. Start. Stuff this in here. There we go. Grab the click. Btn start click. There we go. And the stop. Whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to rename this first. Like so. There we go. And then this, of course, we need to change in the designer. There we go. Okay. And stop text. Not quite sure. Stop click. And grab the click event that we already have. At least now we don't have to replace them. Code is already in there, so we'll just grab these and move them up to the other events up here. Somewhere, which is right about here. So we'll sort these button add. Then we'll go grab the where is it? There it is. That one. See, this is yet another situation where I find regions coming in very handy because it does allow me to hide away the code that I'm currently not needing. So this would be the edit button, and it needs to end here. Go grab the load event for the button right there, like so. Stuff it up here, and then we can hide that away. And this just makes it so much easier to organize stuff like this. That would be the remove button that currently doesn't do anything. Should probably put one of these in here. Code to remove a server profile. There we go. Remove is right there. And stuff that up here where it belongs. And then we just need to add the start and the stop. There we go. Start right there. And boom. And finally, the stop button. Like so. And that takes care of that. So, let's see how this actually ends up working and looking. Okay. I know that they are completely misplaced, but that's something that we will definitely fix. Hi there. I can't actually see your name. It's very dark blue on my black screen. But welcome to the stream. In any case, let's see if these buttons actually do react the way that they are supposed to. Boom, they show up, and boom, they are gone again. So they've now become a little more visible than they were before. We still need to position them. So let's see if we can figure out a way to do that. Now, these buttons at the moment have a specific amount of space that they utilize on the form itself. We can stuff them down here and have them attached to or snap to the border of the form itself. So we'll use that as the bottom point. But oh yes, absolutely. I believe that 1.13 is about to be released, if I'm not completely mistaken. Um, I have seen some of the typical snapshot preview stuff, and it looks like they are close to releasing 1.13 if it hasn't been released already. I honestly haven't checked. Okay, we kind of want to see if we can attach these sort of in the middle of the window. So let's see. The window itself is well, I started playing the game back in the alpha days, and yes, I actually did play Minecraft when it was just a browser creative game before it became an actual game itself. This is a Minecraft server launcher. So what it does is, I'll run it quick so you can see it. Um, this lets us set up profiles for running a Minecraft server. You can download the vanilla jar off Mojang's site for most of the Minecraft versions, as far as I remember. They should still be available somewhere. Then you simply just stuff that jar in a folder somewhere, and this application then makes configuring the server, setting it up for multiplayer access a whole lot easier, because we are using a custom setup to actually make all of the configurations for it, and this also wraps around the server itself, so we can use a nice interface to communicate with the server and have it do stuff. The goal is to have this application be able to do maintenance restarts, so we can schedule, say, at 4 in the afternoon, I want a maintenance restart of the server. At 4 in the morning, I want a maintenance shutdown and have a backup made for daily backups, and then restart the server afterwards. That's the final goal of building this particular application. For configuring the actual settings of a Minecraft server, we've built a nice UI that lets us just set checkboxes instead of having to mess with the server properties file and find all the different properties in there. This one does all of it in a nice UI-based setup instead. And yes, this does support older versions of Minecraft as well. As you can see in the list here, I've got a 1.12.2 vanilla setup, and I also have a 1.7.10 with Forge mod loader and Railcraft installed, and these can actually start up. Just let me finish setting up the buttons, and then we'll see about launching it. This particular application does not mess with firewalls. It doesn't mess with router settings or anything like that. This is strictly to manage slash control the actual Minecraft server instance itself. It doesn't mess with any kind of external network setups like the firewall or anything like that. This is just to make it easier to start up a server, have it run, have it restart every now and then, maybe do daily backups depending on the configuration, and allow me to, or us to, edit the settings for the service a little quicker and easier. Absolutely, absolutely. The source code for this project is available on my GitHub repository, which is linked in the first panel on Twitch. And I always try to get the source code uploaded the same day as I do the stream, unless I need to do some kind of code cleanup and add documentation, then it might show up the day after, depending on what happens during the evening. But it will always be on my GitHub repository at least, or at latest the day after. But it's always there. And do feel free to fetch it if you feel like messing with the code or looking at how stuff is done. The buttons, we needed to align those. So when we constructed this quick and somewhat messy user control to act as a button, we pre-configured it to have a width of 75 pixels. There are 3 of those, so that's 3 times 75 plus some kind of spacing. Spacing might be 5 or 6 or something like that, so let's just assume that it's 6 pixels, so that's adding another 12 to it, so that's 237. For the form itself, its size is 729 minus the border, which is typically 16. So let's see, 237. 729 minus 16, and then we subtract another 237 divided by 2, that equals 238. So that means the X position of these 2 buttons should be at 238, which they are currently not. So let's see if we can fix that, which should be over here somewhere. Let's see. There, 253, that's still not enough, so let's go like this and then attach these. There we go. There, that should be about the middle. Now, one of the cool things about working with WinForms is that most controls have the ability to anchor to a specific position. And if we look at the anchor for one of the buttons, we'll see that it's currently anchored to top left, which means it's anchored according to the top left corner of the window itself. Now these we can change, so if we anchor it to the bottom instead, then it will keep its position but according to the bottom. So we'll do that for all the buttons, and that should then take care of leaving those buttons pretty much where they are, even though we may resize the form itself. This just saves us having to write code that centers these for us. So we'll see how this ends up turning out. Sometimes when doing things offset like this, anchoring is not always the best solution, depending on how exactly you want this to look and how you want it to act. Oh man, seriously? This again? Ah. There are no invalid ranges, you derp. Bottom, bottom, bottom. And this should be bottom as well. Okay, what are you complaining about? Defines the edge of the container, which blah 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 blah. Does it have to be like so? Maybe. Oh well. If it complains too much, then actually let's see what it does. Left, no. Bottom. Oh, come on. An error occurred during code generation. The changes you made. Yeah, I know. Not quite sure why Visual Studio does this at times. It does. I'm not always sure how to fix the issue, but at the moment it's preventing us from actually saving, so that's not good. Let's reset this back to and see if that changes it. Oops. So, will you allow us to change now? No. Visual Studio, sometimes I want to throw you in the trash can. Hey, Sass. Good to see you. Yeah, I know. Alright. Let's see if we can force it. No. Come on, seriously, Microsoft. Alright, then I suppose we shall have to kill it. Let's see. Crunch. Not a nice way of going about things, but for now that's recover. Let's see if it actually manages to recover the same problem that we were having. Oh, it definitely didn't like the locations, so I'll have to fix those. Okay. Whoops. So, 238. There we go. I'll set these and then see if we can save it now. Yep. Nice. Alright, will you allow me to change the anchor this time, or will you derp out again? Wow. Something worked. Alright, we'll take it from here, and we may have to re-add the resources. I'll check that quick. No, they're still in there. Okay, cool. Let's see. Alright, so as you can see, the buttons are now attached to the bottom of the form, and they also stick to the center. And all of it without us having to write any additional code to keep track of where those buttons are versus where the rest of the UI is. You will never use more than 64 kilobytes. Does that explain why I'm spending a gigabyte running their development environment? Anyway, nice one. Let's move these down a little bit just to make it look a little nicer. Let's see. There we go. Sweet. And all of it without any specific handling code for these buttons. Very nice. Cool. All right, so as we can see, it pops up the dialogues as expected. We could, of course, go around and change all the buttons and so on and so forth, but for now, the only place that it really matters is here, because this is where we end up having buttons that can be disabled. So for now, we'll leave it here. If you at some point want to change it, feel free to grab the project and add in the flat button instead. I honestly don't really care whether it looks flat in here because these are all always enabled, so it's one of those whatevers. For consistency throughout the entire UI, I should probably go around and change all of the buttons. At the moment, I can't really be bothered, so we'll just leave it at that. All right, so now that we have the buttons attaching in the right spot, we have them following resizing of the window. We've got the click events, we've got a hover effect, we've got a better enable disabled effect. We should be pretty much done with that particular change. Actually, I wanted to see about nah, doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, so if we want to put in some kind of restart scheduling and backup scheduling, then we definitely need to add in some kind of time handler that will monitor the current time of day. And in that time manager, we also need to add in at least one entry that allows us to specify at what time of the day we want a specific thing to happen. So some kind of scheduling system. And since one of these two server profiles is a modded server, we may want to be able to put in more than one restart a day. The reason for doing that is running a modded server typically means that at some point one of the mods will most likely start lagging for whatever reason. Bad code could be one of the reasons. Not cleaning up after yourself could be another reason. Memory bloating stuff. Weird stuff happens with modded servers when they run for too long. So we may want to add in the option to schedule more than one restart a day. Now, in order to do this, we kind of need a schedule manager where we can edit the different restart cycles. Along with that, we may also want to be able to add in, say, a target folder for a daily backup. And then simply have say a checkbox that says, hey, if this box is checked, do a backup during this restart. So those are some of the things that we definitely want to put into such a scheduling system. However, that particular scheduling system needs to be server profile specific. So we kind of want to add in something that handles these. And the question is then, should we put it in the profile, each individual server profile, or should we do a global scheduling system that then, say for example, attaches to the server host ID? All of that stuff is always up for open debate because, again, this is one of those things that comes down to personal preference. In my personal opinion, it is easier to maintain a single scheduling system than it is to maintain multiple. So for this particular setup, I will do one scheduling system that handles all server profiles. So we simply just book a schedule within the schedule manager from each individual server profile. And it will then go and find whichever server profile requested to be notified by the scheduling system that we now need to do something, and then take it from there. Okay, so let's see if we can set up some kind of schedule manager. Now, for a schedule manager, we're going to need something that monitors the current time of day. We don't particularly, at the moment, need to look specifically at the date or say the day of week or something like that, unless we at some point decide to say, for example, say we want to add in a schedule that does a complete backup of the entire server folder once a week, including game world and everything. Let's have a look quick. See if we went into, say, the modded setup. Let's say we want to do a complete backup of everything that's in here instead of just the world folder, and do that on, say, Saturdays. Then it might be interesting to also monitor the day of week to figure out whether this is a full backup day or just a regular maintenance backup. It's something that we can at some point expand the scheduling system to handle if we really wanted to. For the moment, though, I think we'll just stick with daily backups. It can very quickly and easily grow extremely big and extremely complex. It all depends on what kind of features we want to end up having. For my personal needs, I just need a daily backup and possibly a second daily scheduled restart. So I'll go from there and get this built up to support that. All right. Excuse me. All right, so let's see if we can figure out where to put it. Well, we could just put it in a timer and then have the timer trigger, say, once every second, and then loop through whatever um, scheduled profiles there might be. But I kind of think it would be a little easier to grab the schedule manager and stuff it in a class by itself, so we can just drop it into our form and have it run from there. We could also use the schedule manager to fire up the servers. Let's say, for example, that we want all of the servers in the profile list to start up one after another. If we start all of them at once at the same time, we could end up basically overtaxing the CPU of the computer that's running this, because it does take up quite a bit of CPU resources when these servers boot up. So one thing that we could do is build up a sort of a script that says this is the list of defined servers. Start the first one when it reaches online. Schedule the next one to restart, say, 1 minute later, and so on and so forth. Go through all of the um, startup processes for each individual server profile that it's currently managing. That's one thing that we could use the schedule manager for, to have sort of a delayed startup of each individual server. Um, and then once the servers are up, we'll add in the restart schedule, the backup schedule if one exists, and so on. In any case, we still need to add in a schedule manager. So why don't we put that in here? Let's see. Schedule manager. There we go. Get rid of this. And this one will then internally handle all of the scheduling. Let's see. If we go here quick, just want to showcase it. If you just need something timed quick and easy, then Visual Studio actually has a nice timer control that handles it. You can set the interval between each tick that occurs. A tick in a timer is defined by how much time in milliseconds passes between each time the tick event is raised. We can either use a timer control, or we can set up a separate thread for it. Either way should be fine. The only thing that we in particular need to be able to do is to tap into the system clock, because we kind of want to know what time of day it is. And the way to do that is simply just probing current time of day, which can be easily done with the date time options that we have available to us. So whether we want to use a timer for it or do a thread, it kind of depends on how precise we want to be. If we use a timer, we could end up having the interval be off by, say, half a second. So if we start the timer halfway through a second, then it will always be about a half second offset compared to the current time of day. If we put it in a thread, then we can just say, if none of these happen, then sleep for a millisecond or 5 milliseconds, which is, say, 5/1000ths of a second. And then we won't ever be more off than maybe 10 milliseconds total, which is way less than half a second and hardly perceivable by anyone. So it would appear as if it actually triggers on the exact second, even though it might have spent a couple of milliseconds figuring out the time. It's a matter of precision. For something that requires high precision, it might be beneficial to throw it in a thread. For something that doesn't exactly require extremely high precision, you can put it in a timer. Kind of depends. Okay, so the schedule manager, we need to set up some kind of schedule profile. And these schedule profiles kind of need to at least have a time of day. So we'll just go like this quick. Okay, so schedule profiles. We know that it needs a time of day, which would be hour and minute. We don't want to have to specify, oh, at 12:59:38 you need to trigger. We only need the hour and the minute. Say if we want to do 12:15, for example, then that should be an option that's available. We also need to figure out what kind of schedule this is. Is it just a restart, or is it also a backup? Alrighty, Sir Pinwheel, have a good walk. If we're doing an actual shutdown, then of course we'll just click the stop button on the form itself, and that will then shut it down. We may also want to add in on the server profiles whether it should auto restart, say on a crash, or when launching or starting up the Minecraft Server Launcher application. Those are options that we can put into our little server profile dialog, which would be this one. So here we can add in a couple of checkboxes to control the behavior of each individual server profile, server instance, whichever you want to call it. That's something that we can mess with at some point, add in those options. For now, we definitely need to figure out the main properties of a scheduled profile. At the moment, if we are doing, say, a delayed startup at some point, then that would be another profile that we can put into these schedules. But for our purposes in terms of defining these restart and maintenance schedules, the most important thing is to know what time of day, and is it just a restart or is it also a backup thing. So those are definitely some pieces of information that we need to put into the schedule profile. So let's do another struct for that. Schedule profile. We don't need this. This would be a struct. And for this we need to add in let's see, do we want to store it as a date? Nah, I think we will just store these as event hour and event minute. There we go. We need to figure out whether this includes a backup. If it does include a backup, then we may want to find out exactly where we want to put it and so on and so forth. We can put that information someplace else maybe. But we definitely need to figure out which particular server instance this belongs to. So we should probably also have the server host ID in here. The server host ID is the one that identifies each running server instance, as well as each server profile. So as you can see, we actually have an ID there. And the server host also has a similar ID. We use this to synchronize all of our different lists and such, so we can figure out exactly which one is doing what. Alright, we may want to put in a backup flag that determines whether this is just a restart or if it's also an actual maintenance backup. So we can take the appropriate action depending on what kind of setup this is. Schedule profile. We definitely need to specify the server host ID. We also need to specify the time, minutes, and whether it is a backup or not. There we go. Right, server host ID equals this one, and the event hour equals hour, and event minute equals the minute, and backup equals backup. There we go. At least now we can declare it. So get rid of these. All right. And this one we can close. Okay, so now we have a way of actually storing these. And we have them in a way where we can transfer those profiles between classes and objects any way we see fit. So that would make storing those schedules in the configuration files a little easier. Okay, so actually I desperately need a nature break. So I think I will go on a quick nature break, and we will be right back.